Atul,
Manjeet.
welcome. May I cordially introduce Atul Keshap, our former ambassador and Chargé affairs in India, who was very popular, and we're sorry to see you go, but
I'm
who is
here.
now who is now the president of the US-India Business Council, which is also an incredibly important group and association, because this is what is going to drive the India-US relationship. So Atul, we're here at a very interesting time. Geopolitically, we've got Davos going on, debating globalization. We've got the Quad ongoing. The US has just come off an ASEAN meeting, significant ASEAN meeting. So I'm going to ask you what we decided to talk about, which is really globalization. And I'm going to do a rapid fire. So tell me if you agree
All right.
or disagree.
Okay, fine.
Okay? Ruthless self-reliance, said Jairam Ramesh.
Disagree. I think high trust societies have to trust each other for maximum prosperity.
Okay. Decentralized globalization, Mr. Jaishankar.
Yes, I agree. And you're seeing that with the Quad.
Unchecked globalization, also which Mr. Jaishankar said.
Well, I think countries have to be careful to make sure they make the right choices and that they trust the right countries. So I tend to agree with that. Unchecked is bad.
Okay. And then Russian Senator Alexei Pushkov said sanctions overlooked globalization. That in fact the world is much more interconnected because of globalization.
I do agree with that, but it still doesn't mean that the Russians will escape lightly from what has happened in Ukraine in terms of sanctions.
And of course Twitter, many on Twitter are looking at Davos, calls them Davos gas bag globalists.
No comment.
And your head of the Christine Lagarde and Janet Yellen said it's new globalization, which is trade with friends who share common values.
Yes, agree.
And Bob Koopman, the chief economist of the WTO, said it's a reorganized globalization in a fragmented world.
Agreed.
And German Chancellor Scholz said globalization is when everything was very cheap.
Possibly, but I think tend toward disagree. I think there's plenty of innovation and prosperity ahead of us for the high trust societies.
Okay. And Japan Times called it toxic globalization.
Yes, from certain corners of the world that can be possible.
And others are calling it now slowbalization.
Slowbalization.
Yes.
Maybe, although I have infinite faith in humanity.
And balkanized globalization.
Possibly a little bit.
There is regionalization and localization of globalization.
Oh, now we're getting complicated.
And resilient, dependable, free world supply chain. Atul Keshap.
Yes, I violently agree with Atul Keshap on that one.
So tell us about your resilient, dependable, free world supply chain. What does it mean when you say that?
Thank you, Manjeet. My sense of this is that the pandemic has taught us many lessons, and one of them is that we can trust and we can rely on partners who share our values. If you look at what happened with the very dire pandemic needs of the American people in the early days, April, May of 2020, and how much India helped with medicines and with medical equipment and with personal protective equipment, that is the kind of trust we can have in the Indian people. And if you look at the very tough days India faced in April, May of 2021, American people and business and government and society rushed aid to India because we believe in each other, we have faith in each other, we respect each other's values. And so when I talk about a free world supply chain, what I mean is a network of countries who trust each other, who share each other's values, who always want what's best for each other and will always help in times of need. We've proven that that exists in during this terrible pandemic, and I think we now need to strengthen that.
And also India had provided remdesivir very early on to the US.
I remember.
So it was a good response from both sides, I think, to express their friendship.
And let me just add that other countries, unnamed, have tried to exploit the advantages that they had going into the pandemic and seek leverage. And I don't think that's right. And I think that high trust societies don't do that to each other.
Do you see these high trust societies, if there is a new kind of globalization, are they going to band together and the other countries are going to be band together with others like themselves? Is that the division that is going to take place in the world?
Well, I am sorry to say that it may go that way because for many, many years, the U.S. and other countries tried very hard to ensure a global set of rules and standards for everybody to adhere to for shared prosperity around the entire world. But there's been enough disappointment in that whole process and enough attempts, frankly, to subvert it and to erode it that I think what we're looking at now, and you're seeing it in elements of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework announced in Tokyo, is that we're going to go forward with countries that share our values, we're going to go forward with countries that share our vision, and have a view that trading and cooperating economically with other high trust societies is probably the strongest and most viable way forward at this point.
And which brings me talking about trading. We're in a very interesting era, whereas the really globalization used to be that companies used to lead countries. Now, post the pandemic and post the crisis in Ukraine, countries are leading companies, and companies are really just doing as they're told. How do you see, I mean, US companies were always leading globalization. Now that the world sees them retreating and following the flag rather than the other way around, how do you think that is going to play out with just companies worldwide, multinational companies?
Well, trade has always followed the flag. You know, the truth is governments play an indispensable role in creating the framework in which companies operate. India and the United States are free market economies. We are free societies. We are the guardians of these values around the entire world, and we are the world's two largest democracies. We are natural allies. And if you look at our companies, they are looking to invest and trade and operate in high trust societies, which means each other's societies. Indian companies are doing fabulously well in the United States, across the entire United States. And if you look around India, look at BKC or Lower Parel right here in Mumbai, look at Bangalore and Hyderabad, look at Gurgaon, look at the sheer growth of these urban centers in India, even in Salt Lake and Calcutta. It's because of American investment, American companies, American trust in the high trust ecosystem of India, and the great corporate values and the great human talent. So I think companies are going to take their cue, as they always do, from the signals sent by governments. And I think that the Quad Summit in Tokyo and the previous Quad Summit last year and other Quad initiatives send a powerful signal of the intentions of the leading democratic nations of the Indo-Pacific about what our future collaboration will look like. And so if I were an American or an Indian company, I would feel very comfortable right now about trading and investing in both directions between America and India.
And globalization, when the US partnered with China, how are these companies that have a benefit of the China price, right, 30% down, how is that going to change now that the US is turning away? Are we going to be in a more high cost economic environment? Because those days have kind of gone, and India is really not about cheap goods. It's affordable and built to last, but it's not what China used to do.
Right. Well, one of the drivers of price inflation right now is the profound global uncertainty caused by the war. And there's price rise in fuel and there's price rise in food, and it's unfortunately going to affect the poorest people on earth. And it's a real tragedy. We were just coming out of the pandemic, nations were getting back on their feet, and now we're dealing with price shocks for fuel and for food. Now, that said, I think that companies and countries have realized that you need to have resilient, secure supply chains. And part of that resilience is to have your supply chains more greatly present in countries in which you can have high trust about the ability to move products, to move goods through the supply chain. And I think India and the United States are at the front rank of societies that we can trust, and that we therefore should have every faith in each other as we cross-invest for the mutual benefit of our 1.7 billion people. It will take a little bit of time for a little bit of that adjustment to happen, but I'm confident that given the innovation and the amazingly high skill of Indian and American companies that are members of USIBC, a lot of that progress will happen very fast. These are companies that have the apex of ethics, morality, innovation, technological prowess, consumer and social responsibility. These are companies that that want to see a better future for the world. And I think they'll react very quickly as long as governments create that enabling environment.
Even the SMEs, the American SMEs, because it's really the big companies that are here. The SMEs have not yet come to India. They don't look like they want to, because they've gotten so used to China. And it's so easy in China.
So India has these new policies that are very interesting. You know, the production-linked incentives. There's been a lot of sort of decluttering the Indian economic experience, a lot of opening up of, you know, sort of blockages in the system. There's a pretty robust vision of where India is going in terms of being a $5 or $10 trillion economy. And what I would say is American companies, whether big or small or medium, are catalysts. If India wants to be a $10 trillion economy by 2030 or 50 or 70, to an extent that is impacted by how much American companies can play a constructive role. Look at the skyscrapers of Lower Parel right outside the window. A lot of them are filled with American companies that are employing Indians and helping grow modern India, bringing in global capital, a lot of which is American, to help invest in India in roads and harbors and airports and hospitals and all kinds of things that are good for the Indian people, lower prices. And so our firms are productive catalysts. The investments they bring speed things up in India such that you could become a $10 trillion economy by 2030 if you really set the macroeconomic conditions.
Well, you know, we did a book in 2016, it was published in 2016, on the US-India partnership, in which we predicted a $1 trillion trade between US and India by 2030.
I love it. That's double what I'm predicting.
Yes, so it does seem that once the momentum picks up, that India's the value that India provides and the affordability and the solidity of its products might help.
Manjeet, our trade is $169 billion right now, I'm told, and I've articulated $500 billion. That increase is happening faster and faster. And so the critical job of the governments, both the American and Indian governments, is frankly to empower the private sector. Ease of doing business is critical.
And actually that number was 120 billion in 2016, it's 169.
Huh?
And the 500 billion, we really hope so. We hope that works.
Visualize, realize.
That's another one.
Yeah.
That's Atulism. Visualize, vision. And the last word. With all this talk about globalization and there's also talk about turning inward, Atmanirbhar. Every country has an Atmanirbhar policy. How are we going to, India is just stepping into global trade regimes. We're trying to be global and Atmanirbhar at the same time. How are we going to reconcile that?
So you're right that the pandemic has taught us a lot of tough lessons around the world, and countries are turning a little bit inward. But again, I go back to the idea of the free world supply chain. The fact that we can trust each other. The fact that we probably between the two of us can count all of the prominent countries in that high trust environment. And if we can create that sort of high trust environment and then create access ways for countries that are less fortunate to benefit from that ecosystem, I think it'll be very good for the world. It'll be very good for our societies, good for India and America particularly, given our profound advantages. And frankly, those who reject a high trust rules system can stay out.
Well, that's a great note on which to end.
What fun! It was really nice to see you.
It was terrific and wonderful to have you back in India and in Bombay.
Thank you.
I'm wishing you all the best.
Thank you very much.
And we hope the partnership continues stronger than ever.
I hope so as well. Thank you.
Thank you.